As U.S. mourns gun victims, Republicans block action on domestic terror. Hmm. Republicans in the U.S. Senate prevented action Thursday on a bill. That's today, May the 26th, 2020, right? 2 days after this mass killing of kids, to address domestic terrorism in the wake of a racist massacre at a grocery store in upstate New York, which is Buffalo. Democrats had been expecting defeat, but were seeking to use the procedural vote to highlight Republican opposition to tougher gun control measures following a second massacre at a Texas elementary school on Tuesday. There was no suggestion of any racial motive on the part of the gunman who shot dead 19 children and 2 adults at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. But the shock of the bloodshed less than 2 weeks after the May 14th murders in Buffalo, New York, has captured America's gun violence crisis back to the top of the agenda in Washington. The bill is so important because the mass shooting in Buffalo was an act of domestic terrorism. We need to call it what it is: domestic terrorism. Democratic Senate leader Chuck Schumer said ahead of the vote. The Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act would have created units inside the FBI and Department of Justice and Homeland Security to combat domestic terror threats with a focus on white supremacy. A task force that includes Pentagon officials would also have been launched to combat white supremacist infiltration of the uniformed services and federal law enforcement. Schumer had urged Republicans Wednesday to allow the chamber to start debate on the bill, offering to accommodate Republican provisions to harden schools in the wake of the Texas murders. Just ahead of the vote, Schumer said he had wept while studying pictures of the young victims, calling the state's pro-gun governor, Greg Abbott, an absolute fraud. Abbott has made efforts to loosen gun restrictions in Texas, including signing into law a measure last year authorizing residents to carry handguns without licenses or training. The domestic terrorism bills 207 co-sponsors included 3 moderate Republicans in the House, but there was not enough support in the evenly split 100-member Senate to overcome the Republican filibuster, the 60-vote threshold required to allow debate to go forward. Republicans say there are already laws on the books targeting white supremacists and other domestic terrorists, and have accused Democrats of politicizing the Buffalo massacre in which 10 black people died. They have also argued that the legislation could be abused to go after political opponents of the party in power. Democrats are looking for Republicans to support a separate gun control bill and said Wednesday they would work over the coming days to see if they could find common ground with enough opposition senators to circumvent a filibuster. Make no mistake about it, if these regulations do not bear fruit in a short period of time, the Senate will vote on gun safety legislation, Schumer said. Okay, so this is the Republicans in the United States Senate actually holding up any meaningful legislation on guns. You see? So you have 19 kids die, 19 little kids, 10, 9 years old, 7 years old, died, plus 2 teachers die. And this doesn't mean anything to these people because they're beholden to the NRA. They argue about the Second Amendment. If you look at the Second Amendment, it talks about a in order for the safety of the state, requires a well-regulated militia. That guy who went in there and killed those kids, was he a member of a well-regulated militia? No. And the funny thing is, the people who talk about the Second Amendment never mentions anything about a well-regulated militia. And that's what's necessary. For the Second Amendment to work, you need a well-regulated militia. You can't just have people having guns like these kind of guns that you can use in war. They're no members of a well-regulated militia. So let's get off of that already. These people are criminals. The guy turned 18. The next day he went out and bought a gun. Then I think maybe 2-3 days later he bought another gun, plus bullets and so forth. Those bullets ripped up those kids, shred them to bits that you can't even identify them. They need to use DNA. I mean, what the hell is going on in this country? You look at Australia, England, New Zealand. Those 3 countries had mass murders, and they were able to solve that issue. You don't hear mass murders coming out of England or Australia or New Zealand, right? Or Scotland, no. But they all had that before. But they don't have any Second Amendment, you see? And the Second Amendment was written in a different era. Yeah. There were no police in those days during the time of the Second Amendment. There was the Wild West. Where you're traveling, you probably encounter Indians, you see, depending where you go. So you had to protect yourself. Now you got 911, you got all this stuff going on. What the hell you need these kind of weapons for? It's really crazy.